something that we as human beings stumble upon every single day, every single moment of our lives. But some of these choices that we make can seem so much more silent, so much more invisible, that we ourselves don't realize we're making them. And these choices can go a long way into influencing the way we interact with the world around us. Just moments before you entered this very same room today, you were at the registration desk, confirming your seat at this conference. But that wasn't it. You were compelled to choose between a pink band and a blue band to wear on your wrist. So how many of you in the audience today identify as male and have chosen a blue band? Quite a lot of you. Now, how many of you identify as female and have chosen a pink band? A sheer number of people again. Let's make this interesting. How many of you, regardless of your gender, have gone the unconventional way? In the sense, if you were male, you chose a pink band, and if you were female, you chose a blue band. Raise your hands, please. Barely any of you. Such a sudden drop in number. Well, before we move ahead, what I've done here is a simple experiment to point out exactly those invisible decisions, invisible choices that your brain makes within a fraction of seconds. Something which turns out to be so much more visible, as we can see here today. But with every single choice, every single decision that we make can seem so much more invisible. And before we move ahead, this is a picture of me when I was a little kid. A pretty princess, as my family liked to call me. And like every other kid, toys were my world, my first best friends. These were the toys I used to play with as a 1 or 2-year-old. And do you notice how gender neutral much of these toys seem to be? Nothing girly or fancy in specific. But the kind of toys I chose to play with slowly began to change, slowly began to evolve, and that is when I first began school. School was a whole new space, a whole new environment I began to imbibe from. And the one thing that influenced me the most was most certainly my peers. As I interacted with my peers, I observed the kind of things they talked about, the kind of stationery and accessories they got to school. And I could clearly see that this was different for girls and boys. I observed the way girls and boys were made to stand in different assembly lines. And all of these factors slowly began to influence me as a 4-year-old kid, who was still developing her own personality, still understanding what she liked and what she did not, still carving a personality, carving a path for herself. But slowly, I began to feel this constant need, this constant necessity to fit into my classroom. I wanted to feel like all the other girls who seemed so much more cool than I was. I wanted to feel normal. And that's when I confined myself into this imaginary bubble of being a girl. And that's when I swayed towards things like makeup kits, unicorns, and Barbie dolls. You do not know the number of Barbie movie CDs and Barbie dolls I had as a kid, all of which I had to bug my parents for. But seeing this change, my dad wasn't the happiest person. In fact, once when my grandmother got me a cooking set to play with, he resisted it. He didn't want me to grow up in the conventional way. He wanted me to be someone who was unique and true to myself. Someone who wasn't influenced by another person's preferences, another person's likings. But can you really explain this to a kid who had just ventured out into this whole wide world, full of ideas, emotions, beliefs, and perspectives, everything scattered all over? Not really, right? At least it wasn't the case for me. And so I went on, confining myself into that very same bubble of being a girl. And the color pink slowly began to excite me. I wanted a pink bag, a pink water bottle, a pink pencil pouch, a pink everything. But now that I see my little sister in 2nd grade going through exactly the same thing, I can see that this is something that's so much more predominant within everyone else. One day she came up to me telling me how embarrassed she was of the way her peers made fun of her for using a Spider-Man pen pencil. Because apparently Spider-Man was a male character. Something which didn't make sense to me, something which seemed so silly to me. I don't see boys playing with Ken dolls with male character. Forget about Barbie dolls in the first place. So what was it that made girls' toys girly in nature and boys' toys boyish in nature? if there was a defining factor in the first place. I did a simple Google search, and this was what I found. I couldn't help but notice the consistent employment of the color pink in much of these girls' toys. And if there was anything other than pink, it was either purple, the slightest hint of blue, or an abundance of sparkles. Whereas the boys' toys seemed to have a much more diverse color palette, whitening the shades of yellow, green, and red, a little bit away from the blue narrative. But it wasn't just the colors that differentiated these two gender-based toys. It was the central themes they revolved around. I observed that much of these girls' toys revolved around ideas of caregiving, physical attractiveness, but also revolving around ideas like passivity, perfection, teaching them domestic skills like cooking. Whereas the boys' toys revolved, usually given a much more rigid structure, a rigid appearance, revolved around ideas like risk-taking, violence, and competition, while also revolving around ideas like science, mechanics, and robotics, teaching them physical confidence and spatial awareness, not to mention the mobility feature of wheels given to much of these boys' toys, only making them so much more engaging and dynamic, unlike the immobile and static girls' toys. I observed that through these toys, we have been propagating gender roles through color and value, affecting the way our kids assume, associate, connect, and interact with the world around us. The fact that millions of kids across the world play with these toys makes us even bigger than you and me, even bigger than toys itself. From birthday parties, gender reveal parties, maternity photo shoots, to even the way you dress your kids. All of these factors have a huge and a predominant effect upon them. We have been forcing and fixing upon them a defined personality, a fixed identity based on their gender, before they could even learn to develop one themselves. Why do we do this? Where do we find the need, the purpose to do this in the first place? I stumbled upon this question when I conducted a study about a year ago, as I approached boys and girls asking them what pink and blue as individual colors reminded them of. About 85% of them thought that pink reminded them of a girl's personality, femininity in general. Whereas 45% of them, not a huge majority either, thought that blue reminded them of a boy's personality. But some also said that blue reminded them of things like oceans and seas, something which made complete sense to me. Because the blue narrative hasn't always been as prominent as the pink narrative. I observed, as I surfed through the internet, that there were also other people who experienced something similar, adults. I saw a post where a woman expressed the time when she approached a man buying a big colored yogurt bottle, asking him if it was for his wife. Another post was where a male assumed a particular shirt in the men's section was in the wrong place. Why? You guessed it. It was pink. I realized that this pattern, this paradigm of assumption, association, and connection carried on from childhood throughout adulthood, like a cascade of influences, dominoes toppling and tumbling over one another, with every invisible choice, invisible decision that we make. And this is what we call the unconscious bias. Something which affected a majority of you when you yourself were choosing between a big band and a blue band. It's a psychological term given to it. But over the years, it has been observed that this unconscious bias has proven to reduce things like diversity, uniqueness, and inclusivity in areas as large, as essential as the workplace. So how do we break this chain of bias? How do we stop it? Let me bring in the SEEDS model into discussion. The SEEDS model suggested by the Neuro Leadership Institute underlines the 5 root causes of bias. Number 1 being similarity, where your brain acts as a mirror, perceiving people similar to you positively and people a little bit different to you negatively. Number 2 being experience, where your brain rushes to conclusions without giving it a second thought, holding on to things that are most obvious or easier to assume and understand. Number 3 being experience, where your brain thinks you know it all, valuing your own perceptions and your own experiences. Number 4 being distance, where your brain values the things that seem closer to you than the ones distant to you. like your family circle compared to strangers. Number 5, being safety, where your brain overcounts for the negative consequences of any activity you may undertake, contrary to any positive consequences which may also arise. So how do we use the SEEDS model to help mitigate our biases? The first thing we can do is to acknowledge this model and work exactly against it, exactly opposite to it, like reverse psychology. Let's get back to how we began this talk. Let's play with color here again. What if pink was a masculine color and blue was a feminine color? Well, fun fact, it actually was. In the 19th century, pink was assumed to be a boy's color because it was something that branched out of red, a much more fierce and passionate color that seemed to, I'd say, a little bit gaudy upon girls. Whereas blue seemed to be color which matched the dainty and delicate image of a girl's personality. Something which was certainly generalized back then. But it all changed during the World War II. Just like the Nazis forced youth to wear yellow badges in concentration camps as identification marks, gay men were forced to wear badges called pink triangles. And this association between pink and gay men transformed the color pink into a symbol of non-masculinity, weakness, and femininity in general, changing the color and gender narrative for years and years to come. The reason why I brought this up in the first place is just to show you how something so simple as your perception can change through time and space, based on your environment, your stimuli, something you choose to surround yourself with. And the only way your brain can get past it, the only way your brain can accept this is by learning how to visualize, observe, examine, and in the end, accept the things around you. Which really just involves making yourself familiar with things that seem so much more unfamiliar to you. It really just involves putting yourself out of your comfort zone as you interact with the wider social circles with an open mind. What you can also do is to take an implicit association test, an IAT, readily available online, just to identify the smallest of biases, the smallest of prejudices that you may have towards someone or something, so you can learn to interrupt them when you feel a negative juice of energy filling within you. So at the end of this talk, what I want you as my audience to take away from this is the next time a little girl wants to wear a Spider-Man backpack to school, let her. The next time when your son wants to help you cook cake, let him. And the next time you go to the mall, I want you to be a man and give pink a chance. Thank you so much.